And Toby, are you there?
I am.
All right. Well, this is good evening, folks, and thank you for joining us. We are now live, and for those of you who have been with us month after month, welcome back. If you're brand new to this speaker series, welcome to you as well. And for those of you listening later, we live in a world where we share content both synchronously, for those of you who are here right now, then separate asynchronously for those who show up later and listen to this. Thank you for joining us. This is a really exciting evening with our guest Toby Cartan, and we're going to have a really interesting webinar and a chance for you as a participant to ask questions and be engaged. So before we begin, however, I want to thank the hosts here tonight. Our hosts are the NEA and the Center for Great Public Schools. We have been at this now since I think they've been engaged since about 2013. If you aren't familiar with the Center for Great Public Schools and for our communities of practice that we have constructed here, they are really something quite special, and it gives you an opportunity as a practitioner to actually find fellow educators who may share a like interest, who might have a like challenge. And literally it is and Brandy told me today it's now over 40,000 participants. And it is a community of practice where educators find educators for free. We engage and we learn and we grow together. And this speaker series is part of an engagement we've been doing now for 3 years. And it has been very successful in helping to really share important information with our colleagues all over the nation and beyond. So I want to also thank leader extraordinaire Brandy Bixler and also Christopher Thomas for giving us the leadership to coordinate this right with the NEA. And with that, I really want to leave the lion's share of our time here together getting started. So if you're participating tonight and you're with us, here's how it's going to work. Brief intro. Toby is going to then take over and share with you some really awesome thought leadership that's going to help you on a Monday morning get ready for your professional practice. And then we're going to give you a chance again, the last 15 minutes or so, for you to ask questions about your class, about your situation. So Toby, I know you have control there. If you can move on to the next slide, would be great. And even on to the next one if you could. So yeah, can you go back one? So just a couple of quick tips as you go along. Tips for engagement here. If you want to be a speaker, we invite you. You can quickly see that. We encourage you also to mute your mic when you're not speaking. I'll be muting mine in a moment. And I do hear some music in the background there, so we do want to make sure that if you are on with us right now as an observer, make sure you hit the mute so we don't hear your background jams. And if you want to speak, turn on your camera. We'd love to see your smiling face. There's a raise your hand feature you can see there. And then you can toggle in and out of full screen by clicking on the icon that you see there. Next screen, please. Really quickly, I became the host here several years ago. I do a lot of work with digital learning and this book is called The Anywhere, Anytime Classroom, but I do lots of work with creating digital communities of practice. And I always brag about this digital community of practice because it is the largest, most robust, and for my money, truly the most sustaining and helpful community of practice out there today. So I move to the next slide. So Toby, let's just jump right in to our friend and our participant here tonight, Toby Cartan. I'm really excited, Toby, to have here. Toby is an instructional coach, an education consultant, an author, an adjunct professor, and inclusion specialist. She's taught populations of learners ranging from preschool to the graduate level. Her first publication was Inclusion Strategies That Work, Research-Based Methods for the Classroom, and it was an international bestseller that is now in its 3rd edition. In addition, she has designed online courses and PD units for practitioners and for staff all across the country. She's collaborated with administrators, staff, and students and families, local, national, and international school sites, at educational conferences, and has been an invited speaker and inclusion coach. Throughout her career, she's also helped to translate research into practical applications, which is what really these workshops are all about for K-12 classrooms and classroom teachers. She's also been recognized for the Council of Exceptional Children and New Jersey Department of Education as an exemplar educator, and twice the Teacher of the Year award winner. Also ongoing professional goals to collaborate with schools and staff, and to effectively include students in the least restrictive environment, looking at general education classroom as always the viable first option. So Toby, that isn't enough for your background, but that does give those of us tuning in an opportunity. And this is so exciting because we read these books, we hold these books in our hands, we use them for our professional practice, and now we get to actually hear from the authors. So this is so exciting. So Toby, I'm going to turn it over to you for what I know is going to be an exciting, really set of comments and perspectives. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Casey. My first slide is talking about my first experience teaching learners who had special needs. And if I go back to that first experience, it was in a place called Brooklyn, New York, in a private school, and it was all the students that the New York City public schools said could not be educated within the walls of those classrooms. And if we look back at that experience and that I had, the students were segregated from the general education population, and that only spirals as we go on to life. So I wanted to invite you as the audience, and we have a diversified group here, to think of your first experience. And I want to think about how many of you would like to repeat or tweak that experience. Anyone want to formally apologize for the things that maybe you said or did or didn't do or didn't say? And in the chat box, if you can, today I would, because what would you do differently? What would you do in terms of what you know now as an educator? Some of us here are administrators, special educators, general educators, related service providers, and we all have different skills, and our students do as well. And the key is to match that, because if we're going to modify, we first have to acknowledge who our learners are. I know that when we do something like that, we have to think about what we do. And in this age of technology, when we think about our first experience teaching, it was quite different. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. There was no ways of virtual manipulatives online. What we did have was a need to address and be reflective. And the one thing that I found, and if you take nothing away from this webinar, please take this away, that we need to concentrate on a strength versus a deficit paradigm. And this was a recent tweet that I did, and thinking about that we have to lift the foundation and raise the ceiling, and never to define a learner by his label or her label, but by his or her potential. And that's something that is just not optional. I just want to stop a moment. Is everyone okay with the audio? Because I am getting a couple of messages from people that they don't have audio, and I still hear some background noises. So if a few people could continue to mute or communicate if you have any issue with audio, we would love to try to address that.
Yep. Douglas, I think you're the one who's got the background noise. Can you please mute yourself? Douglas Reif, oh, he left. Okay.
Oh, I'll just press this message. Thank you, Douglas. Okay. Now, the thing is, and this is a quote from one of our researchers, and if some students are not achieving at expected levels, staff should change the services, supports, and specialized instruction rather than lowering the expectations. And in that first few years that I was teaching, and I thank you to Casey, who introduced me with many titles, but the one title that I really love the most is being a teacher, and a child walking in August and September and then walking out in May and June and saying thank you because they have gained many skills. And not because I did not say that he or she could not do that, but I then was reflective and I said, how would I be able to do that, you know, and do things a little bit better in what I'm doing instead of looking at what students cannot. And I thank you to our hosts, because you also have on there a top 10 list here. And this webinar is going to be able to be accessed in the future. And someone had posted that, and I wanted to address that along with this top 10 list. And what I have here is I'd like to concentrate on these 10 points through the rest of my slides. And this is what students need, because sometimes we dive right in the deep water without realizing we have to take shallow steps and inform people of where they're going. I know before I see a show on Broadway or something, I like to see what the general idea of it is about, and that's what your top 10 list is here. It's our general idea of what we're going to be covering, and all of these are going to be addressed in each slide. And all of these top 10 lists, from concentrating on students, not their labels, to thinking about learning as an evolutionary process, are going to be addressed in each of our slides. So I'm visual. I think some people in this audience are as well. I say I'm on Facebook, you could follow. I say Pinterest, and all of a sudden people's eyes light up because some people are very visual. And I have these different icons here. The ruler is for structure. That's number one in lesson modification. We need to set up a baseline level of what students know and measure. I once had a high school math teacher who was in an uproar because she found out that her students would have to take an end of year test, and she was told initially that they did. And here it was February. I said, stop right now, let's measure, and let's find out what they know. It turned out that the students knew 30% of the curriculum in February. It came to May, and they knew 60% of the curriculum. They still didn't pass, but their scores went up 100%, which told that learning was taking place. We need to establish that baseline level of what students know, because that guides our instruction. The brain with the awareness, that has to do with the fact that we want to know about differences. We need to know what dyslexia is. I do a lot of workshops on dyslexia, and some people are still under the notion that dyslexia means you reverse your B's and D's. That might be a secondary characteristic, but it is not what students are about. So I need to know that a student with dyslexia doesn't know that 26 letters of the alphabet have 44 different phonemes. It's a language processing disorder. The heart is for compassion, and I'll paraphrase Maya Angelou when she said that students will remember how you treat them long after they forget what you said to them. And if anyone is lacking this compassion, please choose another profession outside of education, because we're in this, and that our heart has to be in it. And we reach students' minds, but if they know we care about them, especially students with social, emotional, and behavioral issues, they will step up and learn more if they know that other people care about them. And some students don't go home to wonderful environments, and the one safe factor they could find is a caring educator and a warm, welcoming school environment. Collaboration, the hands together, that reflects the fact that I don't have all the answers, but let's say a student with dyslexia, I might turn to my speech and language pathologist, who will give me more strategies how to deal with those moments. In addition, reflection. Reflection is essential because, you know, did anyone here have a 10-minute lesson that ended up taking, 10 days, or a 10-hour lesson that ended up taking 10 minutes? What went right, what went wrong, and it's important to reflect on that. In addition, inclusion is a right, it's not a privilege. It doesn't exist in itself. You know, if I go to Target or HEB or Dillard's, I'm not going to stand on the inclusion line, but I'm going to be on the line where everybody is. I have a double strike through in the word frustration, and we want to take away the frustration for school staff, educators, and families. Because if students are feeling frustrated, families or educators are feeling frustrated, which is this one on wonder with the transitional word set up. If any of you have ever been to my workshops, professional development sessions, I set up strategy tables because I know that some students will need fidget toys, or some students might need transitional word lists, or maybe if I'm teaching multiplication, I might have a hundreds chart on there, which some students might need to help them with the skip counting. Effective learners ground their concepts in reality of what we're doing, and effective learners reflect on what needs to be done. And we, as students and educators, we think about what needs to be taught again and differently. We question, we value wait time and different response options. I say we grease neurons, and sometimes it's the hands down strategy before you ask. You know, for questions, you know, students might need to sketch, sing, hum, dance, speak, read, think, collaborate, and the materials might include pencils, crayons, shaving cream, you know, different devices, wipe off tables, Post-its, you know, and I call it T to the third power. We want to turn, talk, and think. And that, like I said, involves the VAKT, relating this to the curriculum. Maybe we're going to do a curriculum dice game, you know, which lets the worksheet become 3D. Or maybe when we're making cells, we're not using a worksheet, but we're actually showing the nucleus and the cytoplasm and the mitochondria and the different parts with something that looks like this. With kids, we remember more than that worksheet. Or we're doing latitude and longitude with two different skeins of yarn. You know, like I said, the step-by-step approach, well, maybe this is how we're going to determine the number of neutrons in an element. And step 1, step 2, step 3, and then, like I said, we're also showing a model, you know, or maybe we're going to have students get up, you know, a student with ADHD would do a human number line with, do you strongly agree with the Federalist approach or the anti-Federalist? And they would stand by, you know, -5, +5, or 0 if they were being neutral. You know, this tool has been around for a while in Abacus, but maybe that's what it takes for a student to learn place value, or maybe they're going to go to the NCTM, the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, to learn more. And all of these involves a whole, part, and whole approach, where students are all together as a whole, they're broken up as a part, and then they get together as a whole. Like I said, we don't have all the answers, but therapy, one of my Pinterests, has a lot of books about different abilities that students could focus on and relate to characters and stories rather than hitting things head on. So just to sum up, we want to concentrate on individual students, not their labels. Be collaborative and think about who else is involved in this process, you know, or maybe think about who we could partnership if we're co-teaching. I created this on GoAnimate, where someone is co-teaching with Abe Lincoln. And, you know, he says to her, well, I guess you can make copies of things and see if the homework's done. But she says, no, I could do more if you share your plans with me. And we need to share our plans with each other through a collaborative approach before we modify our lessons. And to know more about our students mean that we share with our students, our families, colleagues, related service providers, whether it's an occupational therapist who can help me organize a student with autism, or whether I want to share with a physical therapist who could help me with strategies if my student has dysgraphia. You know, And we need to reflect and to realize that learning is an evolutionary process. You know, I love this lesson I saw. They were teaching evolution, and they had different cell phones set up because it's an evolutionary process that that defines the word evolution a lot better. This slide here is actually the one on multiple intelligences. There's a little bite out of it. That's because a dog actually took a bite out of it. So my point here is believe the student who says my dog ate the homework. So sometimes that happens. And in the same way, you see an origami. I did this as an adjunct professor at Drew University. We were simulated a learning disability, and I asked the students to create a pinwheel. And this particular student ignored my instructions and created a crane. And I'm sure a few of you have had students where you give instructions and they do something totally different. So that was very advanced that this student made, a beautiful crane. But what I said to the student was, that's really nice, but I need you to make the pinwheel. And when you finish making the pinwheel, could you teach us all how to make the crane? So I honored that student who had a different ability. So on Monday morning, I hope you have walked away with a few strategies. Sometimes in my development sessions, I confirm what you're doing. Sometimes we clean cobwebs. And sometimes you can have some takeaways that you're going to add your own sprinkles to something I said. And I invite you to do that. I'm going to have a last slide here, which is from Jackie Robinson. And he said a life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives. We all impact students in different ways. And as educators in the field of education, administrators, we have a tremendous influence on our students, and we always will. And I think that modifying lessons means that we raise the bar for all of our students to have an impact on their lives, not only in school, but when they enter communities.
Toby, that Jackie Robinson reference there was beautiful. I'm really glad you ended there with that motivation. That really outstanding, and thanks for sharing all those references with us. You know, what are you a Jackie Robinson fan?
Actually, my family, we're Met fans, and in the Rotunda in this place in New York, Citi Field, it's actually Jackie Robinson Rotunda, and that was up there, and that just struck me. Going to a game, being a Met fan isn't easy these days, but that was there, and Jackie Robinson was quite a pioneer as well.
Very much so, and I appreciate that motivational touch at the end. You know, you really did. I appreciate the Monday morning readiness, and I hope all of our participants, as you were listening, you're going to prepare in a few minutes, as we're going to throw it open to you for some Monday morning questions for Toby based on what you heard or what you didn't hear, if there's stuff that you want to ask. But Toby, what do you think of all the stuff that you shared? What do we, as a profession, not to pick on, just looking at us from a macro perspective, but as a profession, what are we missing? What are we not doing? What's our most egregious gap right now, based on your observance of where we need to grow? What's our most egregious gap right now?
This might sound funny, Casey, but sometimes we're too ambitious as educators, that we have our year at a glance. We know where we need to go, but we don't stop to pause and reflect and to think about, are we reaching our students? And, as a profession, we have many things on the plate that we need to uncover, and a lot of demands in terms of what needs to be expectations. But at the same time, we need to think about the different ways that we reach students, and to heighten our differentiation, and not by, like I said, lowering the expectations, but approaching the way we modify in a way that invites students to learn and to be learners at the same time.
I really appreciate that, because you're right. There's such merit in simplicity, and we do get too complex sometimes, for sure. Tell me, I know you go in and work with schools, but can you tell us a little bit about, since individual teachers may be listening to this, or administrators may be listening and thinking about your strategies. Can you give us a little bit of a success story, even like a small one, about a group that either a teacher you work with or a group that you work with where your work had an influence, and what impact it made on students? Because that's ultimately what we're after.
I would love to. I'll think of a particular incident where I'll give you two examples if I can. One is with a student. And he was a student who was on the spectrum in autism, and now he's my Facebook friend, and he's attending a college in Florida, and it's a college for students with learning differences, but he just finished up 2 years there, and he is a tremendous success. And another student that I met, I met him outside of Office Max, one of my hangouts, and what he did was he was never good at math, and he, was not able to be successful, but now he is successfully writing away because that was his strength. And the other example, I said two, okay, I'm giving three, was in a classroom in Texas, and I work with a teacher, and he actually lectured for about 50 minutes, and I watched his whole class fall asleep. And when it happens. So when I gave him my coaching notes, which weren't, aha, I gotcha, but were just, some things that I perhaps wanted to point out to him. And he took them in. And then I was in another region in Texas, and I met this same teacher who thanked me. And he's in the field of history, and he was now our supervisor in social studies. And he had all these incredible stations set up. He was doing the whole part whole, which I was talking about, and he was outrageous. And I said, "What happened?" He said, "I listened to you." So, I go back to Jackie Robinson. We have an impact on people, and it's a cool thing if you could, continue to have that impact on your learners.
Well, those are awesome anecdotal examples, and I'm convinced too that attention to these details would obviously have an impact on those test scores in a small and large way. Do you have any examples of where dedication in that space has helped maybe those quantitative types that are looking at test scores?
Yeah, and the test scores are just so important to not teach to the test, but at the same time, keep your eye on the big ideas that the tests are looking for, and not to dilute what the lessons are about, because years ago, when I go back to the first slide, when we first started in special ed, learners were able to take, tests that were at a lower level, or they were excused from standardized testing. That's no longer the case. But now we look at that, and we do that same thing with the test, and we do the discrete task analysis. Like, one of the, in an ELA class in a middle school, I was there, and one of the instructors, they had to analyze a poem. So it had line 5, line 10, line 15. So the first thing she had her students do was to number line 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, because the question said on line 9. So if the student, don't assume. So, sometimes it's the little things, or, maybe going to the math reference page where the formula is and teaching about the formulas, or in tests where students are allowed to use calculators, but they don't know how the fraction function works on a calculator, and to give instruction for that. So it's kind of like, UBD, understanding by design, working backwards, seeing what the test requirements are, and then working backwards and making sure that you are addressing the constructs of what the tests are asking students to do.
That's really helpful, and I hope the folks who are listening are taking good notes. But tell me, you did touch a little bit on technology, but tell me, how does technology change the trajectory of what you're talking about here? And how can, as an instructors, how can we think about how technology can influence the arc of what we're trying to achieve here?
Wow. Do we have time for another webinar, Casey? When you talk about students with differences or students without differences, technology is never the lesson, but it's the support. And it could just change it for access. It could change it for engagement. It could change it for expression of what they know from, tools like I mentioned in math, from virtual manipulatives to word prediction programs to, communication boards, be it low tech or high tech, to tools such as Kahoot or Flickrs or, Quizlet or, interactive flashcards, down to PowerPoint, down to Powtoon, down to, avatars. I mean, even students with depression, research has said that they'd rather talk to avatars than to learn. So, if you have students demonstrate their learning by creating, their own vocabulary or a song using technology, or perhaps creating their own on BrainPop has a movie feature that they can create. That's a way for them to show what they know. It's also a way to engage learners, and, down from, interactive graphic organizers down to, tools where they could record notes into a pen. So it's a huge game changer. There are just so many ways across different ability levels that students could show what they know and at the same time access the curriculum.
Boy, Toby, there are days when I have on my bad hair days, I could certainly use an avatar that could that would be great.
Yes.
So many of our participants here again are connecting, from all over, and there's more and more really creative couplings being coming together. How can teachers collaborate, even if they're in a let's say they're in a PLC and they're using your work? How can collaborating teachers work together and employ these strategies even more effectively?
Collaboration is non-negotiable, and that's what's really changed in special ed, where I'll close my door and do my thing. That doesn't do well because, more hands lighten the load, and it takes more than one pillar to create a house at the same time. And in a PLC, it's a question of sharing and parity of rules, and not one person has all the answers, but together you ping pong ideas off of each other. And one thing that sometimes, especially, some people who collaborate, a huge complaint is that, we don't have enough planning time. And that sometimes is the case, but it's also how are you using the planning time that you have and focusing on one unit, not one lesson, but one unit. And you think about, well, how are we going to differentiate within this unit? What are we going to do that is the non-negotiable, the baseline level, that everyone is going to know? And then what are some learners going to know? And what resources are we going to have? And if you have that type of setup, especially if you're doing, let's say, a cross-curricular lesson, so suppose you were, in history learning about the Industrial Revolution, and a PLC, if you're together with your grade level teachers, then maybe, in English you're doing a Dickens novel, or in chemistry you're learning about combustion, and you get together and you think about that. And in that PLC, at the same time, what you want to be really certain about is your types of assessments and what options for learning, and to make sure if you are touching upon learner strengths, and to think about, at the same time with the PLCs, how you are going to allow learners to demonstrate their knowledge, and how you're going to set up your curriculum that you are not diluting the learning objectives, but you are going to give learners a way to show what they know and to also capitalize upon your colleagues' strengths in the PLC, and maybe they know more about one learner than you do.
Well, yeah, that personalized knowledge about the learners, along with sharing resources, along with sharing strategies, all of that would appear to to really pay an awful lot of dividends. What is it? It seems, it's hard because all of us have been in our profession a little or a long time, and all of us, most of us went to school in the same system. Why is it so hard for our systems to comprehend this idea of a highly personalized approach for learning for these students, and per your title of your book, all students? Why is that so hard for us as a profession to comprehend?
Why is it so hard to comprehend individuality and personalization? Because there are many curriculum demands that we are faced with. But at the same time, we all chose our profession for individual reasons, and that is the same way. And maybe we could look at it something more palatable. Like if we're going into a restaurant, that's why there's a menu of food choices. And even if you look under poultry or seafood or, meat options, you're going to see many choices because we're not all the same. And that diversity is what gives us strength. And, even within setting up cooperative learning situations, you could have each individual have a different role within that. The same way that you would do with a PLC is that you want to have that individual accountability. So, even though if you have the same curriculum, which is fine, we want the same, standards and to raise the bar. But at the same time, how are we going to give more autonomy, empowerment, and, have our learners step up to the plate and to choose the tool to show what they know? So whether that's singing a song or reading a book or, creating a web quest, we're allowing learners to capitalize maybe on their musical ability, their technology, their writing skills, their reading, whatever it is, we are valuing, and we're doing transmediation, because then the learners' weaker areas become strengthened by what they're better at. And, the same way as an educator, I don't sing because I don't have a good voice, but at the same time, I love art, so I might use more visuals, which doesn't mean that I'm not going to incorporate songs within my lessons, because I know that some of my learners do have musical strengths as well.
We only have some time left here, a few minutes left here. I'm going to invite participants, and I don't know, Brandy or Christopher, I don't see for some reason, the chat log, I don't see any questions. I know they were invited certainly now to drop them on us, because as you can tell as we talk here, we've got lots to talk about. I'll launch another one if I can. I'm curious as to what how are these approaches different by level? In other words, elementary, middle, high. How should we think differently about these approaches with those different levels in mind?
I think that's a great question. I'll relate it, let's say, to reading. The principles go the same, but we need to honor the integrity and the age level of the learners. So, there are, let's say with dyslexia perhaps, there are students whose reading abilities are need help, whether they're in the middle school or high school, but I'm not going to give them a book to read that's, insulting their maturity level. So I think that the interests have to be capitalized on, whether a student is in kindergarten, 3rd grade, 8th grade, or 12th grade. But the principles that I have spoken about apply to all learners, and for example, the VAKT, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile. So if I was having a learner who had difficulty with reading, and I had he or her or writing, and to write letters, let's say in a salt tray, that would imprint memory within that learner. But at the same time, if I had a learner that was in a higher grade and was doing something like that, perhaps I would have the learner tap and on his or her arm for the number of syllables, because that would have more meaning for him or her. Or perhaps at the same time, I would have the learner listen to books on tape. And there are many organizations out there, such as Learning Ally, that would do something like that. But I think that the principles apply when we do a step-by-step approach, whether we're giving someone a visual schedule, if he or she is in preschool, or sometimes posting the schedule of what's happening in a middle school classroom is just as valuable, because students need the structure. And how we structure our classrooms invites our learners to follow the schedule and not to be overwhelmed by too much if it's not within their zone of proximal development.
Boy, that's really helpful. It's a great frame to work from. I've got yet another question, but before I do that, if anybody would like to either chat a question, you also can turn your we've been yelling for you to mute. If you'd like to unmute and camera up and say hello and wave, we'd love to hear you. You are invited. And so if you have a question that way, you're welcome. I'll pause for a second if anyone would like to jump in with another question. Well, Toby, while they're considering that really quickly, tell me if you shared so much information. Can you tell me one habit I could develop as a teacher that would potentially be really helpful in terms of advancing this work in my classroom? What would be one habit I could start tomorrow that could be potentially really helpful in serving kids with these thoughts in mind?
Okay, I think it's important to continually reflect and to document, and to invite learners to do the same. It's not partly what I do, but it's also what I get the students to do in terms of their reflection. And the examples, and I think it goes under the big umbrella, Casey, of collaboration. And I would, just think about or tally how many times have I collaborated with my colleagues? How many times have I collaborated with my families? How many times have I collaborated with my students? And that's a huge umbrella, so I talk about step by step. Did I share that with the mom or dad who says, what can I do at home to help? And then I'll say something like, perhaps get a reading log going at home, or invite the WH questions at home, or share the strategies with the families at home, or perhaps think about, did I ask the math teacher what behavior the students did there that I saw there? Think about how I could be more reflective and collaborative, and that goes with all parties that I'm working with, because lesson modification doesn't mean just modifying, but it also means thinking about how we are going to do it as a team. I do invite any other questions, Casey, if you have, or to continue the collaboration by continually applying the inclusion principles.
Sorry, Toby. I was chatting to myself there in beautiful mute form. Sorry about that. I left you hanging.
No worries. A soliloquy is always lovely. Yes.
Really quickly, I apologize. We have one friend who's asking, can you think of some colleges or schools that are really good in serving the individual student? I mean, are there some exemplars out there, even with universities, that are really good at personalizing? That's what I'm taking from this question. But personalizing that, I mean, do you have any actual examples of exemplars out there, like university or school?
Yeah, and that's kind of like a very large question. If that person wants to email me privately, because it would depend on the type of disability that a student has in terms of that. But I think that a very good website to go to is thinkcollege.net, and that is an excellent one that could lead you to many, many options.
Very good, Toby. Well, listen, we promised to keep this to an hour. You've been very generous. Ladies and gentlemen who joined us both live now and will join us eventually cybersynchronously, this is really helpful, and these are things we can use right away. Toby, do you have one more slide there with your email information there so that the folks can see it? Do you have that there? Is it a slide at the back? I can't remember if you have one more of those, but because you did invite the opportunity to come.
Looks like Toby's screen kind of freezed up.
Looks like, yeah, we might have lost her somehow.
Yeah.
We do have this PowerPoint. We do have her email address. It is with the presentation. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And Brandy, did I forget anything else?
No, I'll have all this posted in the Ed Communities group. So go to mynea360.org, sign up for an account if you're not already a member, and then join the educational webinars group. And that's where you will find her top 10 handout, and you'll find the slide deck and the recording.
Very good. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Thanks again to the NEA. Thanks again to Toby for just an awesome presentation. Have a great night.
Thanks.
Thanks, Christopher, too. Bye-bye.